G'day folks, Scott here. Today I'm reviewing Annihilation. This movie is directed by Alex Garland, who made the incredible film a few years ago called Ex Machina. If you haven't seen it, you really should. This movie stars Natalie Portman, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Oscar Isaac, Tessa Thompson. Now, the first part of this review is going to be 100% spoiler-free. I just want to tell you enough to make you watch it if you haven't already watched it. Now, it's been out for a couple of weeks on Netflix, and it came out theatrically in America. It didn't get theatrical release anywhere else in the world. It just went straight to Netflix. But I've been really busy, and I've only just got to watching it the other night, and I took a day to process it before I sat down to do this. So, spoiler-free at the beginning, and then I'll give you clear warning where I'm going to discuss full spoilers on, my thoughts and, perhaps theories on what I thought happened. So, the very minimal amount. This is about some form of meteorite that crashes into the Earth, and it creates a biome that the scientists call the shimmer. Now, anything that goes into the shimmer has never come back out again, and this thing is expanding. And they send a team of scientists, being Natalie Portman and the other women, into this place to try and find out what's going on. And the story goes from there. Now, what I love about this, just like Ex Machina, I found it very hard to guess where the story was going to go. It's very well written. It's a movie that does a few things. It kept me guessing, and I couldn't see the end coming, and I had no idea where this story was going to go, which is very rare for movies this day and age. It had a few sequences in there that were unlike anything I've ever seen before, again, which is unlike most movies in our time. And it's left a very thought-provoking, conversational-based feeling within me after the movie where, I want to talk about it. I want to discuss it with people who have seen it. If you have seen this, once we get to the spoiler thing and you want to, comment on your theories and whether you agree with me or not, then I'd love to hear from you. And that's three things that rarely happen in cinema nowadays. Most times it's a safe bet from the movie studios where they'll just do what they think is going to make money. They're not going to challenge you as an audience member to use your brain and think about things that are presented to you in a manner that you might not used to being presented. So that's all I'm going to say on a spoiler-free side of things. You really should watch it. Most of you have a Netflix account. If you don't, get a free month and check it out, and then come back afterwards and watch the rest of this. So from here on out, I'm going to go full spoilers and talk about as many things as I can think of. Now, I guarantee you I'm going to forget things, and you might get to the end of this and go, man, he didn't even talk about that. I didn't actually prepare a list. I probably should have, because there's so many components to this movie that I really feel the need to discuss that I guarantee I'm going to forget some of them, so bear with me. So, Natalie Portman obviously being the main character in this, and being a genetic scientist. She studies cells and she teaches them as a professor in a university, and, one of the opening scenes of this movie is her obviously talking about single-celled organisms and how cells replicate, which, obviously thematically has effect later on. She has a husband played by Oscar Isaac who's a military guy, but he's like a secret psyops kind of, out there doing stuff that no one knows what he's doing, secret military guy. And he's been away for a year. She doesn't know if he's alive, she doesn't know if he's dead. She's very stressed, she's upset, obviously, fair enough, not coping with things very well. And then he just shows up. And he shows up, he's acting very weird. Now, I found in those scenes, even he made mention about the fact, she's like, where have you been? What have you been doing? What's been going on? And he said, I don't remember anything before. I was just standing outside this room and I recognized you. And I think, thematically that filters into what happens later on. I find it very interesting that when he got sick as a result of, after having sat there and discussed things with her for a while, it was the drinking of the water that seemed to set him off. I'm not 100% sure still to this day why he got sick. I don't think it was the water, because obviously the water, is reflected again later on when she drinks it. But I feel that maybe him being outside of the shimmer for that amount of time, and the longer he was out, the more he started to degrade, was perhaps what was going on with him. But again, I'd like to know your thoughts on that. I really like the premise of the story being told via flashbacks. Obviously, we know that she survived and made it out of there because she's been interrogated by Benedict Wong, all the guys wearing the biohazard suits and stuff when she's in the sort of prison cell observation area, whatever it is, where she's spending the time retelling the story to these scientists or doctors throughout the movie. And I like the drip feed of information, you know. I like the fact that it set up her and Oscar Isaac having this like nice, really tight relationship, you know, good friends, obviously deeply in love, and her stress about, you know, him going off and doing these jobs for the military. But then it sort of got a bit weird on the last morning when he just sort of came into the room, said, "I've got to go, I'm leaving right now," and he was very cold and very isolated. Now that comes back, I think, to me specifically, is that later on, as the story progresses and we find out that she in fact had been having an affair, and that's revealed to us briefly, that it was with one of her co-workers, and then later on, and much towards the end of the movie, in that flashback, where she has the, I wouldn't say argument, but she basically lashes hate upon that guy and says, you know, "Get your clothes and leave," and he's like, "Well, why do you hate me? You clearly hate yourself as well." And they both said that they suspect and they're sure that he knows. So if he did know, which I believe he did, that makes sense that he left to do these increasingly dangerous and these increasingly more secret missions, and why he was so cold to her the morning that he left, full knowing, you know, if he knew exactly about the Shimmer already through a briefing or anything, that there was little chance that he would come back. So obviously meeting the other characters, I can't remember the names of all the women, but they're all broken in some manner, the scientists who will go in there. Tessa Thompson clearly has had like cutting and perhaps suicidal tendencies, and she's more a biologist with plant matter and things like that. I can't remember the other girls' names, but one of them was dealing with the grief of having lost her daughter. The other one, I believe, was dealing with post-addiction. And Jennifer Jason Leigh, being Dr. Ventress, I believe her name was the leader of this expedition that gets sent in there. And it was revealed later that she had cancer. Now, they obviously reiterate to Natalie Portman, not telling her too much information about this, that the Shimmer is expanding, and that they don't know what's going on in there. Radio frequencies can't go into it, and foreseeably radio frequencies aren't coming back out of it. Oscar Isaac is the only person who's ever been in and come out again. So they go into this thing. It seems immediately when they walk into that thing, something happens. They then sort of cut away and tell some backstory, and then come back to Natalie Portman waking up in the tent and coming outside, and they're all disorientated. They've been in there for a seemingly pretty large amount of time. They have no memory of what's been going on and what's been happening in the interim. And I'm still sketchy as to what that meant and exactly what was going on in there. And then, of course, not too long after that, they start coming across bizarre plant life and organic matter, and she's talking about this plant that has all these weird flowers on there, but they're all coming from the same source, and they shouldn't be. They seem like they're different species. They've come across the alligator that attacks the girl and seemingly grabs her leg, drags her in, thrashes her around. She gets out unhurt, but whatever. Natalie Portman guns that thing down, and then when they investigate its corpse, it has replicating teeth inside its mouth, which isn't something that crocodiles or alligators have, and was more akin to a shark, and that's where the theme of the organic mutations start coming in. They start talking about cell mutations and all that kind of stuff, and then it's a little later on when they get to the little community. As soon as I got there, and as soon as I got to that house, my wife was straight away, that's her house, like from her and Oscar Isaac's house. And when she goes into that place, there's a picture on the wall. I didn't really absorb what it was, but she seemed to think something was up, but never really outwardly says. But around this town are the plant people, these shapes that have grown from plants that are humanoid in nature and look like people, but they're not people, they're just plants. And Tessa Thompson's character, the biologist, she's talking about the fact that there's one specific part of the human DNA which dictates our shape, and how that has been replicated in there, and clearly things are absorbing and mutating and changing DNA. They talk about how that the shimmer, they talk about it refracting, almost like how light refracts through a prism, that this is refracting everything, that radio waves aren't getting out because they're bouncing back, and that it seems that cell matter and DNA matter are bouncing around the place and mutating and changing and mixing with things as we go on. That obviously leads to me to one of the most interesting scenes in the movie. We have the bear attack where we see very quickly in night vision this bear sort of jump up and grab one of the women and drag her off into the forest. She gets found, and then when they are in this house and they stay the night, they hear screaming and moaning from a woman outside the house, and one of them goes out, the one who was holding them captive. Everyone's kind of losing their mind at this point. Sorry if I'm all over the place here, but this is all coming back to me as I'm talking about it as well. So the girl who'd had the addiction problems has captured Tessa Thompson and Jessica Jason Leigh and Natalie Portman because she believes, and she's found out they've all been lying and all. Earlier also they found a videotape that showed Oscar Isaac and some other people all very disheveled and, barely clothed and sweaty and freaky looking, and they're filming them cutting open one of their comrades, and his intestines are slithering and moving and stuff inside of him. Of course, that was a very freaky moment. I'm still not 100% sure what that was saying. So they hear the screaming outside. The one who had captured the girls and had them tied up had gone outside. She gets messed up, and this beast comes into the house. Now, although it's still a bear shape, its face is vastly different to what it was when you first saw that brief glimpse of it, at least in my recollections through the night vision. And this thing comes into the room, and the screaming, the fact that every time it opens its mouth, a woman screams and moans and pleads for help comes out of it. Fantastic. I mean, this is an imagery and an idea that I've just never seen conceptualized in a movie before. And, shit went down, and one of the girls gets brutally killed by this thing, and they gun it down and sort of move on. Moving on from that, we then have Tessa Thompson's character basically just give up and follow her theme, I guess, of her suicidal tendencies in the lead up to them moving here, and her, whatever happened to her in the past. And she basically wanders off and just becomes part of the plant life, the organic matter, I guess, the way those people sort of look. So I never picked up exactly what she had, but it seems that the shimmer and whatever's happening in there, especially with human DNA, definitely has an effect upon us and makes us mutate and change. That man they found spread across the wall earlier in the movie, that was unlike anything I'd ever seen as well. And, excuse me, Tessa Thompson's character, before she sort of dies or becomes part of the plant life, she talks about how with the bear that she feels that even the act of killing the other girl, this thing has absorbed part of her voice, her screaming, has used that as a way to, obviously hunt and all, but also for me its facial structure had changed, and it looked more like horse-like, but its bone structure in its face had changed as a result of that attack as well. Everything is changing as a result of what's in there. Natalie Portman's got the strange bruise that's appearing on her arm, and that bruise is in the same location as the girl with the addiction's figure 8 Ouroboros tattoo that she had on her arm. And you'll see at the end of the movie that throughout the movie while she's being interrogated in that room, she has that girl's tattoo on her arm. DNA is spreading amongst everything. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's many themes going on here. I think obviously in the title of the movie being Annihilation, that has a multifaceted meaning. It could be the annihilation of the cell, because everything that's happening inside the shimmer is changing and annihilating cells and changing them from one form to another form, and nothing in there as it was before. Sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes it's horrific, but there's always substantial change. It could also be the annihilation of her marriage, in the fact that we're presented to her to have this wonderfully happy marriage, but it turns out that in fact, her cheating on him and him finding out had led to the annihilation of their happiness and him willfully going away. I'm still not 100% sure why the shimmer sent him back, why he came back for her specifically. I think this is one of those things where I probably will watch this movie multiple times and have different feelings that I do about it right now. But I really wanted to talk about this, as most of you who are watching this have probably only seen it the once and probably have similar questions than me. The annihilation also could be a metaphor for cancer. A lot of the cell replication and the destruction of cells and the changing and mutating of cells is also similar to the way cancer behaves. And cancer destroys lives and destroys families and destroys everything around it. Jennifer Jason Leigh's character obviously admits later on in the piece that she is dying of cancer, and she's gone in there, one, because she is looking for reasons and hope and all that, and two, because she knows she's going to die anyway, I guess she wanted to find out some answers, not necessarily in relation to her mortality, but just in relation to what the shimmer was and what its purpose is. I love the fact that its purpose is ambiguous. They speak a few times about the fact that they don't believe it's an alien matter that's come to Earth with malicious intentions. It's just, its process is to instigate change. Now, obviously, all of this leads to the lighthouse, the point of impact, where the meteor first hit. And Natalie Portman finally makes it there on her own. You know, she's very driven, you know, perhaps out of guilt for the marriage thing, guilt for the, you know, the loss of her husband. The reason he probably took that mission is because of her actions and things. And she gets there, and this matter is growing around, and she finds a skeleton with a weird blast radius on the wall around it. That obviously turned out to be her husband. She watches the video of him basically committing suicide with this thing. He's given up hope. Obviously, you know, seeing the slithering intestines in the other people would give him the impression that thing's probably going to happen to him. What's revealed towards the end of that videotape, though, right as he sets off the grenade and dies, is that the duplicate of him walks out into frame around from camera, and that's clearly the husband, Kane, who has gone back to her. I find Kane a very interesting reference to Alien as well. Being Kane in Alien was the first person to be assimilated and taken over by the alien organism and killed by it, and I find that to be a pretty happy coincidence. Also, you know, harkening back to the Alien movie is when Natalie Portman goes down into the continuation of the blast trajectory of this meteor through the lighthouse down into the ground. When she gets down into that chamber at the bottom, it's very reminiscent of Giger's artwork and the design of the inside of the derelict spaceship where they first found the eggs in the original Alien film. That could just be me, but I find the imagery in that room and the name Kane too much of a coincidence and for me not to notice. Obviously, she goes down there, and Jennifer Jason Leigh is down there, and Jennifer Jason Leigh willfully, Dr. Ventress was her name, gives herself to this organism. She basically breaks apart and into light and matter, and it culminates into this strange replicating ball. Any of you who have ever, you know, looked into documentaries like DMT, the spirit molecule, and psychedelics, and the way people have spoken about psychedelics and this, you know, potential for repeating imagery and fractals and geometry and stuff, I found all this imagery very reminiscent of that Netflix documentary called DMT, the Spirit Molecule. And I find again hard that the director, or sorry, the guy who wrote the book perhaps, hadn't had these similar thoughts. The way that thing repeated on itself and the way it was turning and the shapes and the patterns within it were very reminiscent of, you know, my understandings of that. She has a single drop of blood come out of her eye or just beneath her eye that goes into this thing, and then that creates this metallic-ish kind of humanoid figure that she violently attacks and then bails back up to the room, and then it's up there waiting for her. That leads to probably the most, you know, conversational element of the movie as to what exactly all that means and what happened in that room. This thing increasingly begins to mimic her behavior, motion for motion, right down to the smallest nuances, and they have this bizarre kind of dance around the room as she's trying to figure out how she can get away from it, exactly what it is, what it wants. It's not behaving maliciously, but it doesn't want her to leave. She tries to leave and it pins her up, like hits her pretty forcibly against the door as she's trying to open it. She, you know, gets maybe a concussion or a blow to the head from this. They both fall to the ground, they both get up in a similar manner. And it seems the more time it spends with her and the more it slowly becomes her, the more her tendencies tend to come out in it. Now, Natalie Portman's character for me was pretty violent and very destructive throughout this. Obviously, her being told what was going on in this, you know, she was self-destructive with her marriage. She was self-destructive with her ideology in going into this place, knowing the danger and the fact that no one but her husband had ever come out of there. She was very outwardly violent, where she was the one who killed the alligator, tried to kill the bear, but it was someone else who did it. She openly attacked this thing as soon as it showed up with a machine gun and displayed nothing but fear and aggression and hostility towards it. And then she ends up finding a phosphor grenade, just like her husband had used on the ground, and almost gives it to it, pulls the pin itself, leaves it in its hand. I think at that point it realized what she was doing, and it had succumbed to the fact that, she was thematically about annihilation as well, and she gets out. Now, obviously, this leads back to the room with the interrogation, and the fact that we clearly know that she was a double as well. That wasn't her. It couldn't have been. She had the other girl's tattoo on her arm. Perhaps she was a mutated version of herself. Perhaps she was part her and part this thing. It's very ambiguous, and I love it for that. But I mean, even when she takes a sip of water at the end and puts it down, you see the water mutating and acting strangely in the glass. And then obviously she goes off to him, who's suddenly, as soon as the shimmer is destroyed by the phosphor grenade and it all burns up and everything in that environment, the shimmer comes down, the crystal trees on the beach, all that break. Another thing with the beach that I'm not sure about is the boneyard, the almost artistic layout of the human skeletons that were in the front of that lighthouse. Did the shimmer do that, or did Oscar Isaac or the military guys do that? I don't know. That's another thing. Like, if you've got an idea on that, I'd love to hear it as well. And then the reveal at the end, obviously, with them hugging and them both having the shimmer in their eyes. I hope that doesn't mean it's open for a sequel. If it was well written, perhaps I'd be open to that concept. But fundamentally, all these themes and metaphors through there mean I'm a little lost, and I don't know where I feel that I sit on my ideas behind this. I really think that cancer was brought up too often to not be a metaphor or theme in this. And I feel that the word annihilation fits into so many things, but definitely into her destruction of her own life and marriage that led to these incidents. I think I've covered most everything I wanted to say about it. I'm sure later when I'm editing this, I'll think of points A, B, and C that I didn't cover. Maybe one day I'll read the book and watch it again, and I might come back and do another if I have more ideas around it. Apparently there's differences between the book and the movie, and I'd be interested in seeing them. But fundamentally, what a great movie. What a great situation where I'm challenged by things which rarely happens in cinema, seeing imagery that I rarely see. Even the imagery at the end, harkening back to my sort of, talk about psychedelics and DMT and those documentaries that I've seen about the usage of such things. Everything in the closing credits, again, was that replicating strange, hallucinogenic kind of imagery. I really think that was a big part of it as well. I know a lot of the documentary, when they're talking about the DMT and their travels or, experiences on it, were about interdimensional beings, not aliens. So, perhaps that's a fundamental thing in this as well, where perhaps whatever this was hasn't come from space, it's come from another dimension and created this here. But the imagery really harkens back to that. And I really like the fact that for me, it wasn't destructive. We made it that way. I don't think it had an agenda. I don't think it had a malicious intent. The actions of the people and the military going in there first, it was kind of like aliens, but flipped. First the scientists went out, or some scientists, and obviously, really they weren't, they were actually miners and recon people and salvagers, but, they had a doctor aboard. But first the passive team was involved with the alien thing, and then the military was, and this kind of flipped that around. The military went in first, and then the scientists went in second. I think I could just keep prattling on and on and on about this, but I think I've covered all the points I wanted to. I'm definitely going to watch it again. If you've made it this far into the video with all my prattling, then thank you for watching. As always, if you're new to this channel and you've made it through this, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't. I do regular reviews. Thank you again for your time. I'll be back to review Pacific Rim later this week. Cheers.